those who are attending and having an interest in your hearing health. I trust that you'll find today informative and will get you thinking about your own hearing health as well as those of others. So what will I be talking about today? Well, today I'd like to share a little bit about the services at Canadian Hearing Services. You may know of CHS as the Canadian Hearing Society. In January, we actually had a name change and it's now Canadian Hearing Services. I want to spend most of our time understanding the impact of hearing loss and the communication needs. We'll look at how do we know if we have a hearing loss, and then we will continue on talking about hearing health and communication as it relates to our day-to-day life. So why are we really here today? We all have the right to communicate. Communication is the foundation of much of our lives and is a basic human right. Hearing loss affects communication, and communication is the basis of every single thing we do. So as we go through the presentation today, I would like you to think about the next 4 questions. Think about it in how you would answer. What does that mean for you as well as your friends and family? Do you know somebody who experiences hearing loss? Usually when I ask this to a group of people, I have every single hand come up. That's because hearing is quite prevalent, or hearing loss is quite prevalent, and we all know somebody. So even if you don't experience hearing loss, you know somebody who does, so this presentation will be applicable to you. This is a good question. What does hearing health and hearing loss mean to you? Be interesting if you have a different meaning by the end of the hour. The next question is, how does hearing loss impact a person's life? Good question. And the last one is, what can be done to cope with hearing loss? So let me tell you a little bit about Canadian Hearing Services. It began in 1940, and it was the leading industry around deaf and hard of hearing to decrease the barriers that hearing loss set up. And it began by starting to provide support around finding employment. Canadian Hearing Services is a nonprofit organization, and we're funded by government grants, memberships, and generous donations. We can lump our services into 4 different categories. The first one being employment. So somebody looking for work, who needs extra support in looking how to look, their resume, preparing for a job interview, or maybe they're at work and the communication isn't working very well. They can call us for supports. Products and professional services. This is an opportunity to devices, American Sign Language interpreters, a variety of different services in that area. Community-based social services looks at services provided in the home, or and I'm actually going to expand on that in a few minutes. And the last one is clinical services, which is our therapeutic counselor. So the one I want to focus on is the hearing care counselor, or the hearing care counseling program. This is a program for those 55 plus, and the role of the counselor is to provide information on hearing health, coping with the impact hearing loss has on our lives. And earlier I mentioned about impact. How does it impact our lives? That's a really good question, and we'll expand on that soon. Coping with difficult listening situations. Everyone thinks the only thing that we can do is put in a hearing aid and our hearing loss is cured. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. There are other pieces of equipment that will assist us to hear. We do provide workshops on hearing aid information, everything you need to know about hearing aids before you actually go and have your hearing tested. Hearing Help Classes is an 8-week course on everything that you need to know about communicating with a hearing loss. We provide our services in the home, well, not right now, or in the office, not right now. So right now we are providing services on the phone, email, or through virtual meetings or a webinar like today. Yes, we have to get creative during this time. Hearing health, hearing loss, what's the big deal? After all, doesn't it mean the only thing a person needs to do is wear a hearing aid? Hearing affects communication, and communication is the basis of all interaction. What is often overlooked is the overwhelming impact of hearing loss. When communication isn't working, we can see as a result anxiety, withdrawal, loneliness, depression, and the list continues. What a waste of human talent. If I was blind, does that affect your eyesight? No. If I'm in a wheelchair, does that affect your ability to walk? No. If I'm hard of hearing and I'm saying, pardon, pardon, does that affect your ability to communicate with me? Absolutely. Communication is a two-way street, thus affecting everyone engaged in the conversation. People tend to take a passive role of not admitting to hearing loss and withdrawing when communication gets tough. Others don't know what to do to make communication work, or even know that it's a lack of hearing, and instead will wrongly label a diagnosis or characterize a person as not paying attention, not being interested, forgetful, and so on. Hearing loss is something we tend to ignore and neglect, but it's very, very important. And it affects many, many people. 1 in 4 Canadians experience a hearing loss. And it doesn't just affect people over the age of 65, it affects people from birth on. So the most important fact to remember is that we're dealing with a loss of communication. I have a saying, and that is, if we focus on hearing loss, we're going to come up with a loss. If we focus on communication, we can make it happen. So let's focus on communication. Now, okay. Hearing loss is one of the fastest growing health concerns in Canada. At one time, the #1 reason for hearing loss was noise. And today, the #1 reason for hearing loss is actually aging. More and more of us are living longer, thus more and more of us are affected by hearing. There are stressors that we experience when we have hearing loss. Now, I know we all experience stress. However, when we have a hearing loss, there are some factors that affect us more than others. And we can lump these into 3 different ways. So the first one I've put down is communication. And what I'm getting at that is background noise is an enemy for somebody with a hearing loss or wearing hearing aids. When there's more background noise, it's more challenging to actually hear the words come out. Or people want to tend to shout. And by shouting, it actually makes it more difficult to hear. And when we think about it, it's angry people who shout, or we shout to get a person's attention or out of frustration. Poor lighting will also make it more difficult to hear. Or these days, we're all at home, and if we're not living at home, we might have a pet that's wanting our attention or barking, or children playing. We have a little bit more background noise as well as a little bit more activity taking our attention away, making it more difficult to hear. With a hearing loss, we have to concentrate more. And that concentration takes effort. And that effort can be tiresome. So if we feel tired or more tired with a hearing loss, that's quite common. It is the fact that we're taking energy to communicate. Also, our eyes. We rely on our eyes to bring in more information. Many will experience what we call dry eye. We're not blinking as much. Or we go to see the optometrist and, they'll say, oh, you have some dry eye, not recognizing that it may be due to overuse of using the eyes to bring in the information and not blinking. I meet many people who are proficient speech readers because of the amount of hearing loss that they have lost. And we will talk about how to keep those eyes moist so that they aren't experiencing them become dry and they're not being more tired. Because dry eye does mean that we are more tired. So many people will use a drop in their eyes that is prescribed by their optometrist. So I want to put hearing loss more into a visual term. Hearing loss is invisible. But if we have good hearing, we can choose what we want to hear. We can choose what we don't want to hear. It is clear, and we can then pay attention very easily. The middle section there takes a little bit more effort to actually read what it says. And it says impaired hearing looks like this. That's what hearing loss is. We hear, but we just don't hear everything clearly, and it takes more effort to bring in that information. And the last section is black. And that is somebody who has lost all of their hearing, and they must rely on some other method to bring in communication. So let's have a little look at the impact hearing has on our lives, because this is what we don't realize is affecting our life. So the first one, we can separate it into three different areas: social, psychological, and physical. And all of these will happen whether we recognize that we have a hearing loss, how long we've had a hearing loss, whether it's been recent or all of our lives. So socially, conversation may become less fluid. Interactions in a noisy place is more problematic. Our personality may change and adjust. And you'd say, well, how will my personality change and adjust? Well, perhaps we might be a little bit more on edge, or we tend to want to do things a little bit more on our own. Or maybe we're not participating in communication as much as we once did. The next one is psychological. How are we feeling? And it is amazing how hearing or the lack of can affect how we feel about ourselves. Um, we might feel frustration, embarrassment. I hear many people will tell me that they don't want to go to a group because somebody might come to them and say something, and they would feel embarrassed that they might give the wrong response, something that is off topic. Um, and the last one is physical. It takes a lot of energy to hear. We got to concentrate. We might feel more headaches. We might feel more muscle tension, especially in our neck and our shoulders. This can affect our whole health. It can affect diabetes, it can affect blood pressure, a whole host of other physical ailments may start to pop up just due to the stress that our body is experiencing. So, not a very nice list. I also want to draw upon talking a little bit about dementia or Alzheimer's. Dementia is a link to hearing loss. Social isolation and loneliness, common consequences of hearing loss, are also associated with cognitive decline and the development of dementia. The risk of Alzheimer's disease was more than doubled in a lonely persons compared to persons who were not defined as lonely. The symptoms, and yes, there's a big word there, presbycusis, which means hearing loss due to aging, may resemble other conditions or medical problems, and one of them is dementia. So when I say presbycusis, if we have a hearing loss due to getting older, what we tend to find is that we hear, but we don't hear clearly. So for example, somebody might say, okay, I am going to go out and chop an onion for dinner, might hear, I am going to go and shop for onion for dinner. So shop and chop sound alike. Or key and tea. Is that a cup of tea or is that a key for the car? They sound alike, and so we hear the word differently. You can also go on to YouTube and type in the Canadian Hearing Society. On there, you will find some videos on hearing loss, and one of them looks at cognitive decline and hearing loss. Something else that people don't realize is that when we lose our hearing and we choose not to gather information, we choose not to deal with it, and we just sort of tuck it away, what happens is that part of the brain is not being utilized. And if that part of the brain goes unutilized year after year after year after year, that brain is not being utilized now for becomes starts to die. And then eventually we get a hearing aid and we put that hearing aid in, and unfortunately, it can't restore that brain back to where it once was. So that is why we are seeing that link between dementia and hearing loss. So I want each one of you to actually give yourselves a pat in the back for actually coming and gathering information on hearing health. So, speaking of hearing health, how do we know if we have a hearing loss? After all, it's invisible. Well, one of the first methods is we're constantly asking people to repeat. Pardon, what? What did you say? And we're saying that people are speaking too softly. And we feel that people aren't speaking clearly. They mumble. So we hear, but we don't always hear clearly. And I was mentioning that a little earlier with those mix ups. I actually had a couple volunteer who went out to the gym And when they came out of the gym, the husband said to his wife, who's hard of hearing, "Wow, what a gorgeous looking sky." And her response was, "Yes, he is a good looking guy." Well, luckily, both of them understood hearing loss and the fact that there are mix ups, and they both had a good chuckle. And yes, sometimes we have to laugh at some of the outcomings. The next one we look for is being able to hear when there's background noise. And the more as hearing loss goes down, the more trouble we have when there's background noise. Or we find we're turning up the volume, and others will say the TV's too loud. However, for us who have a hearing loss, we'll say, no, the TV's just fine. You must have bionic ears. Children's voices are also difficult. They tend to look away, they tend to have a higher pitched sound, making it more challenging to hear what they're saying. For some, the telephone can be a great place to hear at, and sometimes the only place they can hear, but it can also be a place of challenge. Hearing loss, as I shared earlier, creates a lot of fatigue. Our attention will wander. It takes a lot of energy to process that information that's coming in. Spending more time alone because it's so challenging to be with others. And instead of feeling a sense of comfort and peace, we are built with frustration. After all, communication is the basis of all interaction. At one time, people used to wait 1 to 10 years before seeking help. It's great. Today, now people are waiting 1 to 3 years. And as I mentioned earlier, the damage of the central nervous system is only partially recoverable when treatment is delayed. So it is important. Get the hearing loss when it is mild. Yes, I know we can hear, we don't realize the impact, but by waiting, the impact becomes more significant. When we do seek information, and we do get treatment, and I don't mean just treating with a hearing aid, we feel better about ourselves. Our independence is greater, which means that we have an improved mental health, but also better relationships with our family and our friends. If communication isn't working, that affects every interaction we have. So, how do we get treatment? 90% of people with hearing loss can improve communication by doing two things. The first one is, well, and I actually believe you should do number two first before you do number one. But, anyways, the first one is being properly fitted with hearing aids. And the second one is having rehabilitation counseling. So, what do I mean by properly fitted hearing aids? Not every clinic is the same. So, it's important to gather information first about hearing aids, hearing testing, learn the terminology so that when you go, you are prepared to ask questions. And now you know, are you being sold a hearing aid, or is somebody looking after your health? Um, are they looking at what your needs are? That is really, really important. When they're explaining, are you able to ask questions? Are you able to ask questions so that you know that you're getting the best hearing aid for you? So many people will ask, I just want the best hearing aid for me. And I will come back and say, well, what is the best? What does best actually mean? And if we haven't done our homework, then we can't answer that. So the rehabilitation counseling, that is gathering information before we go, but also recognizing that once we have a hearing aid, the hearing aid doesn't correct our hearing loss, and therefore we need information of how to manage communication, how to make it work for us so that we are successful. I always say, how do you go down the yellow brick road instead of making all kinds of turns and curves and going down the winding road? It's so much easier and takes a lot less energy if we can just go straight down the yellow brick road. So I sort of alluded to hearing aids. So let's take a few minutes and talk about hearing aids. Today, there are so many different hearing aids on the market and so many different accessories that go with them that when we go for a hearing test, and now the clinician starts talking about the hearing aids and accessories that are best for you and your hearing loss, it is so overwhelming. And that can be a put off right there and will be a deterrent for somebody actually even making a purchase. I have a few questions that I want to ask because many people will ask me. Hearing aids, do they make the sound louder? So true. They act as an amplifier so that you can hear sounds easier. What they amplify is they amplify the sounds that we are missing. They don't amplify everything, only the sounds that we are missing. Hearing aids, do they restore hearing to normal? False. They can only restore your hearing. Um, They can't restore your hearing. What they do is they amplify your hearing to make it easier to hear the sounds that you're missing. So there are two parts to a hearing loss. One is volume, and the other one is clarity. So they do both tests. And I've had people who've done really well in the volume, but their clarity is really poor. So they hear, but the words don't sound clear. And it doesn't matter how much amplification you put in, that clarity isn't there. Think of a radio station. And I remember this as a child, and especially on a snowy day. And I wanted to know, are the buses running today? And I would put the radio on. And of course, because it's a snowy day, the sound is all staticky. So what do? I turn up the radio to see if I can hear better. Unfortunately, all that meant was louder static. So that's what I mean about clarity. We hear, but the words are not clear. So if we have a hearing loss where the clarity is really good, the volume might not be good. The hearing aid can take care of that because the hearing aid adjusts the volume. We've got good clarity. Now communication is much easier. Where it becomes more challenging is if our clarity of speech is quite impaired. Now communication is challenging even with a hearing aid. Does that mean a hearing aid won't help? Absolutely not. A hearing aid is definitely important, but this is where the rehabilitation counseling becomes even more important. So I just want to stress on those points. Hearing loss is both amplification and clarity of speech. And it's important to understand your own hearing loss and where it fits into that, and thus what is the benefit and limitations of hearing aids for you, as well as getting the support to adjust to the communication needs. All right, so I've kind of talked about hearing loss. Will it restore clarity? I've gone into that in a lot of detail. And the other question is hearing aids. Do they cut out background noise? We see so many ads. Purchase this hearing aid. It cuts out background noise. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Um, They can not amplify only what you want to hear, and this is perhaps the most difficult adjustment made by new hearing aid users. There is no hearing aid that can block out unwanted noise. Just like for us, or those who have good hearing, we can't say, oh, I choose to hear this, but I don't want to hear that. We don't have that choice. There are actually accessories that will help deal with the background noise and diminish it a bit. And those work very well and are extremely important when somebody has poor word recognition score or poor clarity. We all know somebody who has a hearing aid in the drawer, and a hearing aid isn't very helpful when it's in the drawer, and that's usually a sign to me that the person did not gather information and how to adjust it to them. We go to a hearing clinician and we expect that hearing aid or hearing aid clinician to not only sell us the best hearing aid, but to make it work for us. And they will sell a hearing aid that will fit our hearing loss. However, their job is not to provide that overall rehabilitation counseling that the Canadian Hearing Services provides. Hearing aids take time and patience to get used to them, and their effectiveness will depend on the type and degree of hearing loss. It's sometimes difficult to adjust to hear sound again, but what a joy it is to hear again. We all think of hearing aids as the only thing that helps us to hear. There's actually a variety of other devices that help us to be aware of sounds around us. For example, there are amplified phones. What's so special about them? They have a volume control as well as a tone control, and that tone control can be adjusted to make the sounds more clear. You'll also see on the picture there, fire alarms. When we take out our hearing aids at night, we don't hear the fire alarm. So having a device that will shake us up or flash their light that we need in order to get out and be safe if there's a fire. There's also alerting devices to alert us to the front door, the telephone ringing, an alarm clock. So when I say alerting devices, I mean something like a flashing light. I mean a vibrator that you put in your bed, or I mean amplification, that louder amplification that we don't see in the marketplace. There are also personal amplification devices. The one in the picture I have is called a pocket talker, and it's the one with the headset and the little mic. Some people can't wear hearing aids and yet needs amplification. We usually see this device available in emergency rooms in hospitals where somebody comes in and they need to communicate. They actually have a means to communicate with the individual. Did I cover everything? I think so. These devices are available at Canadian Hearing Services. Because they are a health concern, we will not see them in stores. And I know we don't have access to stores right now. All of these are medical expenses. There is a 30-day return policy if the devices don't work for you. So on your screen, there is a few devices. On our website, there is a lot more. Hearing loss affects everyone. Communication is a two-way street. Hearing loss impacts all individuals involved with communication. Both the person with hearing loss and their communication partner can experience negative emotions. And I think that's a piece we tend to think of somebody who is frustrated, we attack them as their personality, not recognizing the frustration is because of the lack of communication. So a little informed courtesy can make the loss seem less. And I have a saying, and I shared it at the very beginning. If we focus on hearing loss, we're going to come up with a loss. If we focus on communication, we can all make it happen. And how do we do that? Well, this is what you can do. The first step is let's get the person's attention. Let's let them know we want to talk to them. We might do that by calling their name, tap on the shoulder, a little hand wave, eye contact, all of that. Now we're ready to listen. And that's number two. Get somebody's attention, we automatically face each other. When we face each other, we hear so much better. And the third one is slow down our speech. I could speak a mile a minute. We would have been done in about 15 minutes. Wouldn't that been great? But when I slow down, my voice is much more clear. We have a tendency, we think we need to shout and speak loud. All that does is actually make it harder to hear. We get the person's attention, but we're more frustrated. So I encourage you, three things to remember. Get each other's attention, face each other, and the last one, slow down. The hearing aid will take care of all of the amplification. I want to share with you a story about a daughter and her 88-year-old father, Peter and Mary. Peter was struggling with his hearing loss. He had recently gotten a new pair of hearing aids to help with the changes in his hearing needs. But because he found his old pair more comfortable and easier to use, the new pair spent most of the time in his drawer. He was having communication difficulties with his wife, his family, and he found social gatherings like church difficult to hear and stressful. As a result, he would often simply sit, observe, rather than take part in conversation. To complicate things, he also has a mild cognitive impairment. Luckily, his daughter Mary learned about the hearing aid information session hosted by Canadian Hearing Services that was offered at her local senior center. She found the sessions very informative and discovered that she would learn even more through a home visit and ultimately hearing help classes. Mary learned during the course that extra effort is taken by someone with hearing loss to communicate, and that there's also a sense of shame when miscommunication occurs. She felt that she was not sensitive enough and realized now that it was not just up to her dad to ensure proper communication, but it's up to all of us to support him. Since receiving services from CHS, Peter says he has gained confidence in social situations and is able to advocate for himself. Even something simple as asking someone to speak slower so he could hear better. Peter learned strategies on how to prepare himself for a social event. And Mary noticed her father is much more engaged in conversations. Peter says he's in a better place now. He's less stressed about hearing and communication and is more comfortable with his hearing aids. And Mary says, my dad was very hesitant to receive the services initially, and after the first contact was quite happy. It made us realize that we're not alone and that there are other people who are struggling as well. Healthy hearing means healthy aging. And now I would like to open it up to you and your questions.
Thanks, Joyce. That was such a great presentation.